Thank you, Katrina. And for me, it's also an experiment, and I want to invite you for an experiment. Are you ready? So think about, if it's okay for you, you can also close your eyes and think about your forest. So imagine that you are walking towards a forest, a beautiful forest. So at the edge of the forest, you stop for a moment. Then, with your next step, you feel that you are entering into a different space. You see the sunlight through the green leaves shining. A light breeze of air is touching your skin. You hear the birds singing, and you smell the earth, the flowers, and the leaves of the trees at the same time. You continue your walk and you walk deeper inside. And you're coming to a clearing where in the middle a huge tree is standing, already there for hundreds of years. You come closer to that tree and you're touching the bark. You go down to the roots of the tree and you sit down. Your back feels the stability and the strength of the tree. You notice that your breathing is getting deeper. You take some deep breath. And more, you're sinking into a deep silence. Now you take some more deep breath. And you're not sure maybe for how long have you been sitting here. You stand up and you walk your way back and you feel very present and energized. Now I hope you are refreshed and ready for the next presentation of Dr. Forest, and you can open your eyes. Thank you. And I would like to ask you if you maybe think about one word. If you see these pictures, or if you saw these pictures, maybe you think about one word which is coming into your from an emotion. And I would like you, maybe you can write that down in the chat. So I also thought about it, and I of course there are also many more ideas coming up, but maybe you can just have a look at what I thought about it. Here, my presentation, I want to start with some cartoon I found in the newspaper, and I want to talk about forest pedagogy. So as foresters, not all the foresters, but many of the foresters also do excursions and trainings, also do presentations about forests, and we are called forest pedagogues. So that's not for every forester, maybe the thing he liked most, but not everybody can also do this kind of job. But if you are very much connected to nature and you're connected to people, this is a beautiful combination also to tell about forest and to give the room for students, for children, but also for grown-ups, that they can experience forest, they can experience themselves in the forest, and they can experience themselves within a group. But normally, or many people don't need that, so they go into the forest and they are looking for an experience they can have themselves. So I was laughing and thought about these three guys standing there as forest pedagogues, and maybe they're a bit disappointed. But on the other hand, if I have the experience, people go into the forest, they mainly stay on the pathways. So many people are afraid to go into the forest. So we also lost the connection to nature, or many people lost the connection to nature or the trust into nature and the wilderness, maybe in the forest. So they like to have a guide. They have to have a person where they can trust, they can relax. And sometimes if we talk about forest bathing, you need the permission that you are allowed to sit down for 15 or 20 minutes or even 30 minutes to do nothing. Nothing means not that you do nothing, but you don't have to do nothing. You can relax. You can open yourself, and you don't have to do anything. So if we talk about health, I saw this picture and I went through this linden tree. I think in English it's called a linden tree, because the linden is for me the tree species who is standing the most for health. It has a heart. The leaf has a shape of a heart. The wood is very soft, and the energy of the tree has a healing energy. So this big tree is standing in the south of Germany, somewhere to the border to Bavaria. And there's an old saying that if you go through this hole in the tree, if you have a disease or you have a hurt, a wound, this tree is taking this disease or the wound, and you get a healing. Of course, this is a mystical idea about this saying, but I think there's a deep knowledge also in people that forest and trees have an healing aspects, which is very old, and still it's very much inside our knowledge. I want to talk shortly about the salutogenesis and the feeling of coherence, which means comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness. So if I'm going or guiding a group into the forest and a school is asking me, for example, that we can learn something about the forest. So for me, knowing is very much connected to feeling, and feeling is connected to all senses. So I think everything in the forest is connected. Everything in my body is connected, and everything in my brain is connected. So if we learn, we do it on a cognitive basis, but also on an emotional basis, on a physical basis, and of course also on a spiritual basis. If I'm outside in the forest, I'm very alert. Maybe that's also connected to my dinosaurian brain. So the very origin brain of where I don't think about it. I just feel about things. It's about my intuition. And so if I'm connected to that part of brain, I'm very much present. I'm here and now. I'm experiencing things right away. It's not like an idea in the future. Everything is now. So in nature, there is an acceptance and a natural movement from creation to preservation to destruction. And that's a natural movement. And of course, creation and preservation is very much wanted. It's very much idealized. If there is something new growing and something I want that always the forest stays like this. But foresters are also much connected to destruction. So I think that's also a problem, an emotional problem. But it's also important for us and a good possibility if we are outside with a group for foresters, and also like we heard before, It's about an education, the destruction and also the use of wood and timber or forest products is also a need for human beings and a good material we can use, but we should use it, of course, in a very conscious way. And if I'm talking about creation, preservation, and also the need of destruction for getting timber or getting wood, then I'm also very transparent in my work and I can tell about it. If I'm outside nowadays with groups, it's not much anymore about learning, not in the first way. Of course, learning is always there. But I experience also, I have two children, two sons who are 12 and 16 years old. And for the last 1.5 years, they stayed so much inside. The digital learning was very present. And after the digital learning, the social medias and the connection with the friends, which was also digital. It's so important for younger people, I think for everybody, to have the embodiment, which means that I can feel myself again, that I'm actively outside. And if I'm active outside and I stay for a longer period in the nature, I can develop a basic trust and I can develop some skills. For example, we have a program where we stay for 3 days with teenagers completely in the forest. No medias are allowed. There is no sweets allowed. But there, with a group of 15 children, we stay and we cook together and we build a hut together. And it's very special to see the changes. So in the first 2 days, also in the beginning, we made it also for 2 days, then we changed into 3 days. The first 2 days is very much to know the place, to get in contact with the group, and to get the trust in the area where we are. And on the third day, it's really changing because the group comes together and you have learned already some skills. It's a natural, the group interacts very natural. And at the end of these 3 days, I have always the feeling that you feel that there's not much needed to be happy as a human being. You need a hut or you need a shelter where you can sleep. You have a fireplace where you can sit and cook. You have to need some food. And of course, you have to know some skills and you have to have most important, maybe the social interactions to be in a group together where you feel also connected to. And all other things, the commercials are every day telling me what I have to need is not so much needed. It's on top of that. But this basic trust I can develop if I see with these easy things forest and nature can provide, I will always have the basis to be happy. Shortly about intelligences of knowledge, and I find it very important because children and students behave completely different if they are outside than inside in school. And teachers always tell, oh, I didn't know that these children are so handy or they know a lot of things, and they get maybe in a leading position of maybe making firewood. So there are more intelligences, aesthetic elements, so where somebody can be creative. The surrounding is and intelligence of getting about spaces, about kinesthetic, which means movement and body feeling, an intelligence that I'm able to feel myself, intelligence that I'm able to feel others, an intelligence that I'm able to be in connection with animals, with trees, with nature in general, and of course an existential knowledge and intelligence, which means also more in a spiritual way. In forests, we have the possibility to have many flow triggers. And I think as human beings, we are addicted to flow triggers. That is the best our brain, or that is the best our brain always wants. So to be really into something, to feel connected and to feel that it's not me anymore, that I'm part of a bigger thing. I have the feeling sometimes of wonder. If I'm open my mind, I can experience wonder. And that is meant, that makes a meaning to me, that makes it meaningful. So if I talk about salutogenesis again, I can comprehensibility. I understand things, how they are connected in the forest, and I know things about them. I have some skills, and I know that I can manage a survival in the outside, and it all makes sense to me. So if I have these aspects together, which is not as a which forest is a very good place to learn about that. I have the feeling of coherence, and which is the basis of my health. I already talked about these aspects of holistic learning. Just shortly, if we look about the feeling, the understanding, empathy, to develop empathy for all the other animals, and respect, the movement, agility, and most important maybe is the joy in the things we are doing. If I'm connected with myself, I behave more mindfulness. It's more easy for me to relax, and the interaction and the creativity is rising. Maybe Amanda is later talking about forest bathing, the forest bathing, and I just shortly want to say that it's mainly a same process. With children, maybe it's different because they in the beginning have a lot of energy. With grown-ups, you always have the feeling, you have the process of an arrival of an information to get to know with the place, of a period of emptying, like you maybe in your short meditation experience, that you enter this forest and you get empty, you get more aware, you have maybe a mindfulness exercise, you experience a space of silence. And from that point of view of space of silence, you get into a creativity. And there is a neurobiologist, a very famous one, Gerald Hüther. He said, to be bored is the best what can happen to a child. And bored means not like I think about all other things. No, really to be in a silent mood where creativity can be born and ideas come up from a deeper knowledge from inside you. And that is the possibility to go further with the creativity process, and then to return back to the group, to the forest, and integrate that into your daily life. And here I want to say that there is the maybe the main strengths of a forester, because we know a lot about things. We know about trees, like a beech tree, which is connected and maybe is able to stay for 50 or 100 years in the shadow, and then there's a light coming because another tree is falling, and there's a corridor of light, and suddenly this tree is able to grow again. So into the light, and with a 200 to 300 years, he develops himself still and is able to react. And if we talk about trees like that without talking about human being, but everybody who is hearing this kind of story is connecting himself to the tree and saying like, yes, maybe it's like my life. I was also for so long I was standing in the shadow, but now it's my time. I want to grow, and I see this light, and I would develop myself. So that is a big potential for foresters, and I think a big need also to talk about these experiences and stories, maybe also from forests. Health, if I also follow this discussion the last 2 days, health is often thought about grown-ups, but I'm also doing presentations for midwives, for example, or young parents who have a very small child, and talk with them about why is nature so important for children or for human being. And we sit together in a gym, or I don't know, in another room, and the father and mothers are sitting in a circle, and in the middle there are some babies or some very small children lying and playing together on the carpet or on the floor, and they have some plastic toys around, and everybody looks to be happy. And if you think about this child, you see on the left side, this very small child, and you think about the differences. This child is experiencing the grass with the different the leaves. It's textile. Maybe the ground is cooler than the air. Maybe the sun is on the face. It's getting warmer. Maybe a breeze, so they can feel on the skin. So the things are moving, and the eyes has to adapt different scales. Maybe it hears a lot of different animals. So if you think all these things, what kind of difference it makes to be just lying on the floor and playing with some little toy or some short amount of toys. Just to think about, and if you think about the development of a brain, which had such a big potential, it's for my experience so important that you start very, very early to go with your children into nature and give them the chance to have this development, this brain development in a very connected way. Also, the small boys in the hut there, they build their first house. They can clean. They can invite somebody. It's their space. They are responsible. They have the feeling that they did something great, and that's forest. If we talk about biodiversity, forest provides so many play toys. So you don't have to buy anything. Everything is for free, and you can use everything as a toy. It's not about maybe about but it's also an aspect about biodiversity. I also want to talk about, because we talked about financing, of course, maybe some also how to say, if I'm responsible in Freiamt also for funeral forest, and here it's also coming together that people at the end of their lives think more and more like where I want to be buried. And in this place where we provide this area for funerals, it's so much increasing the need and the wanted for these places. And I also would say that this is a healing forest because it's a ritual forest. And people are very thankful that they can have a burial in a special, very connected, natural way, and which is completely different to a normal cemetery. And now I want to tell that these are also economically interesting, because if the village where I'm working for is earning much more money from this burial or the cemetery, forest cemetery, than we can ever generate with timber. But that's just an extra aspects. So there are many possibilities for prevention, but we talked about that already, for violence, addiction, media, obesity, burnout, for tourism in cooperation, of course, with other institutions. I think villages or cities are very interested in forest health days, like forest walks and excursions, but also an offer for forest bathing. And also some therapy offers, which is of course for foresters only in cooperation with a professional therapist. But what, as the forest authorities, they can also provide a framework of opportunities, like a mindfulness path. We also said so. We did that in Freiamt, this Achtsamkeitspfad from the SDW. We installed that, and we also built some like a bathing tub, which is more like a joke, but people want that, and they want also make a picture. They go inside and they can feel they are happy about this. But we also did some labyrinths, and I don't know what else. Maybe I think also some forest kindergartens, for example, it's a framework opportunity, because this, if we also talked about this pollen or this diseases where people or children stay for a longer time in the beginning of their life outside, I think that's very healthy. So I think for foresters, the cooperation is very helpful as we do it today, to be connected between schools, also nature park areas, some spa associations, some medical institutions, and of course also forest pedagogues or forest therapists. They don't have to be foresters, but they are that we connect very close. The university, and of course, like we have today, the scientific exchange. So I want to thank you, and I hope that I could show you with some pictures more than I could talk about.
Here we have Amanda Schumann, is a postdoctoral researcher and a lecturer at the Institute of Chinese Studies at the University of Freiburg. And she received her PhD in history from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and has published extensively on the topic of sports and physical culture in the People's Republic of China. In the past, she has led groups of adults and children in the United States and China in various fitness programs. She's also a long-time trail runner, registered yoga teacher, and is currently completing her training as a forest bathing guide with the Forest Therapy Institute. In her presentation titled Forest Bathing, Wellness, and Interconnection for the 21st Century, she will discuss her own motivation for pursuing training to become a guide and one program's training methods. The presentation will then discuss the structure of a forest bathing session and show a few examples of how this wellness practice encourages participants to move beyond simple contact with the forest and towards interconnection with it. Okay, that's going to...
Thank you. I think Bern has to, I think he has to stop sharing his screen so I can share mine. Sorry, I just realized that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
It's okay now?
We're still seeing your.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if I can get this. There we go. Share. Hopefully now you can see it. All right. Let's see if I can do this and tell me if it shows in notes presentation because I don't want that to show.
At the moment, still notes?
There. No. Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is it showing notes or is it showing just the screen?
Presentation.
Excellent. Okay, excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to this. And this is grown out of sort of a personal sort of story and hobby of mine. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Before I do that, just kind of to give everybody a very, very quick background. We've already heard a lot about forest bathing. I just want to reiterate, this is technically, it's often defined in this way. It's a multi-sensory practice. It's about connecting people, as we just saw and heard. It's about people really noticing the forest rather than only using it for exercise or hiking or foraging. So it's kind of, forest bathing tends to be about building an emotional or an affective connection rather than emphasizing factual knowledge acquisition or in going to the forest to sort of have a very necessarily physiological response, although we can discuss that. Definitions are kind of up in the air about some of this. And I just wanted to say that for me, I think this line, which comes from the University of Derby, which has done a lot of research in the UK about this subject, a phenomenal amount of recent research, that contact with nature is not the same as connection with nature. I just want to emphasize that again as I talk a bit here. So it's about our sense of feeling that life is worthwhile rather than just contact with nature for our general health. So I put this slide up here because a lot of people are saying, is forest bathing the new yoga? This is a big topic in a lot of newspapers now. And certainly you can understand why it's like that, because the books I'm about to show you were all published in the last few years. So we have, it works. We have this one, which is by Dr. Ting Li. He's considered the pioneer in some respects of Shinrin-yoku, the practice in Japan. He also does a lot of scientific research on this topic. Then we have this one, we have this one, we have this one, we have this one. These are all in the last few years. So my point is just to show you how this has become like a real trend. Now, maybe some of you already noticed this, but if not, it's become a huge popular trend. I'd say just in the last 3 or 4 years, this has exploded. We also have a growing range of institutional presence outside Japan. You've heard my questions about therapy, and it feels like in every corner now, both in the EU, but also in North America, there's somebody or popping up to offer these practices, and where are they being trained by? That's always a question. We also have here on the left-hand side, the International Handbook of Forest Therapy, which so far as I know is the only of its kind, and has a lot of studies. Maybe somebody here participated in that. But my point is that there's been an explosion both in forest therapy and in forest bathing. And I personally don't consider them the same thing. And one of the reasons is that there's these definitions are debatable. Some people say the forest is the therapist, but then you also have mental health professionals and psychotherapists who said, no, forest bathing is not quite the same thing as somebody who has a clinical knowledge of therapy. And then there are these terms like ecotherapy, which are more in line in my mind with what forest therapy is trying to be than perhaps what forest bathing is. Just to say very quickly, the training programs are often very expensive. So there are national standards in some places like Japan and Korea, but so far as I know, we're still in the process of standards in the EU. We can talk about North America. It's a whole other story. An overview of forest bathing around the world. I put a lot of text on here. I won't read it. I just wanted to say that in East Asia, where I've spent quite a lot of my time, which I will talk about in a second, the research tends to be on physiological. There's also evaluated psychological health, but there are government established retreat centers in Japan and Korea that are focused on forest bathing right now. And Dr. Ching Li is in charge of this organization here, which you saw in the previous slide in the middle. Then we have North America, which has a shorter history. The reason I wrote longer history in East Asia is something we haven't talked about here at all today or yesterday, is the fact that there is a very long history in East Asian tradition of nature-based practices and retreating to the forests, in particular forests on mountains in order to get away from everything. So the fact that even though the practice Shinrin-yoku forest bathing, nowadays we talk about it as having started in the 1980s, I just wanted to put out that there's a long tradition of practicing this kind of connections in East Asia in general. In Europe, there's a shorter history. We've heard a lot about it. I won't say too much, but I think it's interesting that the focus tends to be on mental health, and that the organizations that I've been working with are also pretty much, or that I've been training with, are also pretty much focused almost exclusively on mental health, which is quite different perhaps than some of the others that are focused, like in North America, more on emotional and spiritual connections. And there's some other places that it is. I don't know as much about those places. So my personal motivation. All right. So I think this is interesting because I think everybody has their own kind of story behind how they ended up in this particular situation. So in my case, it's sort of a confluence of personal life factors that came together, and that I almost feel like when forest bathing became this popular thing and I started seeing it pop up at the bookstores and online and reading news articles about it, it almost seemed like what I was meant to do. So let me explain why. So I grew up with forests and their biodiversity around me. My mother would kill me if she saw this picture, because this is me on the left and my mother in the 1980s and my brother, and this is in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. So I grew up in the partially in the Washington DC area and partially in Paris and France. So growing up with this lovely in this lovely sort of area reminded me of what we just heard from Bernd, where I had this as a very young child from a very, very early age, that this was ingrained in me, that hiking or even just going to enjoy a river like this is what I should be doing. Even our local neighborhood, I collected the box turtle for a day to take to kindergarten, and everybody could watch the box turtle eat a leaf. It seems so simple, but my point is that this starts from a very early age, right? I also cared about the environment from an early age because of this. So, I even did little things like Earth Day activities when I was a young child. And maybe some of you had that experience, but I also sort of continued this as an adult. So I began trail running very seriously about 20 years ago. This is me in, and sorry about the watermark across there, but I'm just trying to give you some flavor of my own background. Trail running was very important to me on a less of a physical health reasons and psychological health. This is a picture of me when I was doing my PhD work in grad school in University of California, Santa Cruz, in a river during an off-road half marathon in Henry Cowell Redwoods State Park. So around this time, I also started doing a lot of volunteer work. So with, for example, there was a Girls on the Run program at local schools. So in the morning, you would show up with the children and you would help, you would basically be a, volunteer mentor and coach for them as they enjoyed some time outside before going to sit in the classroom for many hours. The only times, and let me just finish this slide. This is another sort of thing I experienced in California that I had never experienced before in my life, was redwood trees. Now everybody hears about coastal redwood trees and their magic, and it's true, it's all true. I fell in love with them right away. So this is Sequoia sempervirens, a coastal redwood in Big Basin Redwood State Park, which quite unfortunately was affected by the fires last year and is now being rebuilt. Rebuilt in the sense that it's regenerating. And here's a banana slug because I like banana slugs, and that was the mascot of my school. But at any rate, okay, so we have all this, seems obvious, right? But the only times I didn't have regular access to a forest in my life were doing my research. So let me show you the next slide. I was in Beijing learning Chinese. This is around 2005 or 2006. You can see the lovely air pollution over the city. This is in Taipei. In Taipei, I lived there. I went running all the time. You can see the air pollution there. We have trees, but there's tons of air pollution. And this was in Dalian, in the northern part of China, when I was doing more language training and some research. And everywhere on the streets looked like this. Every day I woke up to this. So the air pollution was always very clear to me. And basically, when I lived in Beijing, trail running was basically confined to the outskirts of the cities but there was still heavy pollution, staying indoors or treadmills. Masks were used, inhalers. I mean, it's not just COVID, masks were used to avoid the pollution. I was the sickest in my life that I've ever been living in Beijing. Okay, so what it made me realize though, and here's the point, is how increasingly few people have that natural experience growing up, or how many people have totally forgotten what these experiences were like. And that's what I really realized in my time. I kept having these countdowns to when I could leave, but I kept also thinking all these people who can't leave. So this really affected my own personal life. So for me, slowing down, the part that comes next, the slowing down and mindfulness, is something I took up about 2 or 3 years ago, but in retrospect is something that I wish I'd had much earlier. This is Portola State Redwoods Park in California. So I was ecstatic to move to Freiburg in 2016 for a new job after spending a year in Leiden in the Netherlands, where there wasn't much forest. Unfortunately, 6 weeks after moving here, my husband was diagnosed at age 37 with brain cancer and passed away 17 months later before our daughter's 5th birthday. He wanted to become a tree, or that's what he said after death, I want to become a tree. So what Ben just said hits home, or to be placed at sea, to have the ashes scattered at sea. The latter happened. He was from Spain in an area near Bilbao called Getxo. So that's where it happened. So during this time, my life was crazy. But I psychologically relied on my trail runs and walks, as I had my whole life, to get me through stress and anxiety. This deepened after his death because of the emotional side effects of grief. I took up yoga. I started reading up on forest bathing. I did, and I still do these practices on my own. I found that they also helped me deal significantly with the increasing eco-grief that has happened, that I had already been thinking about after my years of air pollution. And they've provided a renewed sense for me of the cycle of life. So processing grief, whether for an individual like myself or whether for eco-grief more broadly for the planet, it's unlike anything I've ever encountered before. And the forest at these times has served as my best friend. As they say in grief literature, trees are excellent listeners. The forest is an excellent listener, and they don't judge. So at any rate, so recently what I've done is I've started to get my certification I just completed my certification in yoga last year, and then I've started a second more advanced training, and I'm teaching. And I've started reading about all these wonderful things we've heard about already. So biophilia hypothesis, all the books on forest bathing, eco-philosophy, I've turned back. And the eco-philosophy is really what got me turned on. And I'll just show you two pictures here of my recent forest trail runs in Freiburg. You can see I have a passion for these conifers, and I have a passion for the Douglas firs here. So my thinking here was the possibilities to combine this with regenerative and restorative projects. And I don't want to take up too much time on that, but I just found this the other day, and I had to share this with everybody here because our priorities seem really backwards right now. We all know this, right? But this is the most egregious case that I saw recently. This is from May 27th, I think, of how self-help and these mindfulness practices that we have of just go to the forest for a few minutes seems to ignore the larger problems. And maybe the larger problems of what, in my opinion alone, perhaps, of things that are destroying the environment, if we want to call it economic globalization or whatever, placing a value on things. And so in the end, we have these what I think is a very lame attempt to get people to practice mindfulness for 5 minutes sitting in a booth where they can't even pee because they're charged on their time card for that. Okay, so the next slide, you've probably all seen this. So this is where I really started thinking about, this is the big problem. We're all talking about COVID-19. I'm not denying that it's causing mental health issues, but what's the sort of larger issue here? Is it that people just don't care? I don't think it's lack of education, or it's simply lack of education. I actually think, and this is where the forest bathing in particular comes in, I think it's about getting people to there needs to be new ways to incorporate that knowledge about biodiversity in general into the very sort of kind of, I don't know what you would say, rigid and inflexible ways of doing things that we have right now. So this is my larger thing, and I'm not going to read these slides again, but you can see that I was kind of, because of time, but because of the potential for interconnection. And what I mean by interconnection is these ways of having the self-nature connectedness connect then to the larger problems in the world, to see yourself as part of the world. So that was kind of like my motivation behind the forest bathing practices. Okay, so I have these quotes here, but this is, I put this here because it's a recent study. Maybe some of you haven't heard of. It's just from 2021. So it's, I think it hasn't formally been published, but there's a link to the PDF. You can read the paper that's in process. And it's research from University of Derby again, I think. Yeah, recent nature visits didn't account for increase in well-being. However, noticing nature was associated with the pro-nature conservation behaviors. Okay, so what do I do? Or what does this forest bathing practice look like? So this is how I was trained and how I understand it, but we all know the training programs are slightly different. The basic structure of a forest bathing guided walk, this is again one example, is a series of invitations that are offered to participants, some of which are mandatory, others of which are dependent on the group being guided. Following an introduction, you do disconnection, connection, and integration. Bernd actually kind of explained this already. So what does that look like concretely? So the disconnection and the slowing down is basically moving people from doing to being. It is similar to mindfulness and yoga practices. You need to calm people's minds down. People they want to be doing something all the time. They want to be rushing to the next thing. They want to, how many hours do we have on this? 25 minutes of doing this, 5 minutes. And so it's trying to calm them down. So you have, in my case, I was trained to do an awakening the senses meditation for about 5 to 10 minutes, a connecting to presence, in which people, you might have them do things like, again, what Bernd showed so well, like picking up something and smelling it. Just feeling the air on the skin. Slowing down, really slowing down. You're not walking anywhere in particular, just walking. Then you would follow these by optional, I always call them optional talking circle prompts, because not everybody likes to share their experience, but some people like to share their experience. So We ask them, what do you notice? And we don't use terms like, I try to stay away from using terms like thinking and feeling, because sometimes people are not comfortable talking about it that way. So the general term, and the way we tend to be trained in the organizations I trained with, are, what did you notice? What do you notice? It's a very simple one. When you walk slowly, what do you notice moving? That kind of thing. Okay. Then the connection stage this is where the guide themselves can kind of like adapt and play with the invitations based on the group that they're dealing with. So maybe in these post lockdown times for now, you might work on more social activities or something like this, and getting people to really try and connect with each other. Sometimes I do pairs, like I pair people off rather than doing activities separately. But the connection stage is about what I think Bernd really, really also pointed out very well. It's about, he calls them flow triggers, which I think is great. It's about activating that. So wonder and awe is something that comes up a lot. You know, people sometimes when we do the talking circles after an invitation, people really want to show you something. So on the right hand side, I put 2 photographs here of just from a participant who was so excited about finding, you know, especially on the right, her and her the partner and her pair found this nest on the ground during an activity. So, but these are activities that are very focused on specific senses in some cases. The conversation with the forest and sense rooms are what in forest bathing we might call imaginal senses. So they're not just strictly the senses of the 5 senses we're all used to, but they are about also opening up for the imagination and such. And I don't think I put one on here, but well, maybe walking barefoot would count as that, like proprioception as well. So it's about being embodied within nature and feeling the ground. You wouldn't believe the number of people, maybe this is unusual to this audience, but the number of people who are scared of walking barefoot. They are terrified of taking their shoes off and putting their feet on the ground. So the final sort of bit of this forest bathing walk is usually an integration and a closing period of time. So here we might have, oftentimes I do the sit spot because I think it is good. And so we also already heard something like this, but it's about encouraging people to do nothing. So the sit spot it's a period after you've done these invitations in which the guide has provided some very light direction. Go to the water. Notice the water. What is the temperature like? What does it feel like? Do you see anything in the water? Very, very light instruction, and then you just let them go. Then you call them back. And then in the final spot, I consider this to be, it's a period of time that the participant can use as for reflection or contemplation or just observing something around them. Then I usually do this, I either move to the tea ceremony, or occasionally if there's a group who I think it would work with, I do group eco art. So on the left, you see kind of an attempt to do some group eco art. And I did this one in silence. Okay, so finally, let's just look at some of the feedback from evaluations, because I think this is always interesting. Again, this is more qualitative, like we've heard a lot of quantitative, but I think it's also very interesting to look at the qualitative responses of people in these evaluations and really think about, you know, psychologically, if we want to think about terms like meaning making or connectedness, like how is that happening and what are people noticing within their own practice that is providing that. So you see participants here writing, I felt more open, peaceful, joyful, and connected. It shifted the way I felt quite noticeably. Or something about, yeah, I can slow down and feel my body, again, embodiment, and emotions fully in the moment. I have a greater sense of reverence for nature and life. More relaxed, okay. Inspired to spend more dedicated time in the forest. I've noticed and tuned into my surroundings more. One more. What was one highlight? I always like the highlights because people write really interesting things. So one person writes about spiraling seeds falling to the ground, a hawk flying over them, clouds moving in opposition to the hawk. You can see the wonder and the awe just in that response. The slow walking activity, One person, I was coming out of the small opening in the woods and I happened upon a bright orange slug. So this wasn't a moment. Yeah, in the eco art. I also just want to say last week I did like an informal kind of walk with some master's students, some of whom are from China. And one of them who said to me, as somebody she's 38 and lived in Guangzhou, which is in the south, a big polluted city, for years. And she said after the walk to me, she said, wow, I haven't seen animals. She was referring to the frogs in the pond. I haven't seen animals like that since I was a child. Okay. So finally, I often think about this topic though, but how do we move beyond these psychological and these wonderful walks and into something that's pro-environmental? And I think I'll stop after this then. Or actually I have one or two more slides after this and then we'll stop. So for me, this is where forest bathing walks still seem to be a bit lacking sometimes, or rather my walks seem to be lacking. And I think I could add something more. You know, and how do I do this? So I put this on here because this is from May 2021. Again, it's another one of these World Health Organization reports that basically states the list of its priorities on biodiversity, right? 1, nature provides the basic conditions for health. 2, environment protects human health. 3, pressure on natural environments threatens human health. So again, how do we move it back towards that? And there's also, this is from University of Derby, I don't know if you know this, but they actually have produced an online MOOC that's came out of maybe 2 months ago on nature connectedness. And it plays with this idea of the importance of it. Although I do think it's an interesting question of what do we mean by nature connectedness and how do we show that? That's a really important research question. But basically it claims that the relationship to a worthwhile life, which we could argue could be cultivated perhaps with these kinds of experiences, has been found to be 4 times more important than an existing benchmark of socioeconomic status, right? As related to helping people feel good and functional. Anyways, I just put this up here because I think it's quite important. If this is the direction, this is the UN report. So how do we get from these activities to reach more people? How do we get these activities to reach people beyond spas, beyond affluent crowds, beyond people who are written up a KUA? So I think this is a question I don't have an answer for, but this is a big question in my mind right now, and the funding is part of it. How do we reach these people when there's no public programs yet? Maybe there are. Maybe you can tell me about them. Okay, so hello. Okay, so the final slide is sort of my thoughts. This is more of a question mark, okay? My ideas for some of the adaptations for the forest bathing walk experience, and I'd love to hear other thoughts, but more embodied practices. I think this is really important. In East Asia, they do some with Qigong and sometimes yoga. And it doesn't have to be, I think there tends to still be this general assumption that yoga is some kind of like fitness activity, but I actually don't think of it that way. I think of it much more in terms of a connective and mindful activity. So that's kind of what I mean, and an embodied practice. And as related to that, in my own research, which I haven't talked about at all yet, I have shown that with running and other physical practices, repeated bodily practices have an effect. They have a deep effect on how people understand their body in the environment and what they're doing. And I often think that perhaps a scientist might say this learned behavior is then related to changes in the brain that then encourage people to do something different or new in this case, specific behaviors. So the last 2 things on here I just wanted that on the slide is, this is why I was so interested also in meeting with this group here, is I think storytelling of the forest ecosystem and the forest ecology is not currently well embedded in a lot of the training nor in the practice itself. I don't mean like straight up knowledge, but I mean, for example, we all probably are aware of Suzanne Simard's work on the Wood Wide Web. So talking about things in a way that people can understand their connection to this forest ecosystem, but also understanding how the forest itself is then connected and important to us. And this currently doesn't happen in the walks, but I think there's a lot of potential. And finally, regeneration and restoration. We also don't talk a lot about that in the way I was trained, but certainly the practices of eco-philosophy, I mentioned one on here, eco-philosophy inform a lot of the discussion and the choosing of certain invitations. So some of these actually are very similar and overlap. So in other words, like practices in eco-philosophy then show up in different ways in the forest bathing invitations. So, oh yeah, I don't have time to talk about that. But in any case, thank you for your attention.
My question would be to both of you, more related to our project. You presented work that shows that connection and connectedness to nature is beneficial. I think that is the step we were before we started Dr. Forest, where we wanted to look especially on the effect of diversity, biodiversity within forests on these issues. So, and you concentrate more on the general effect of being out in a forest or in a nature. So could you quickly give some impression from your point of view whether the diversity of forest actually matters within those exercises you are doing?
Yeah, maybe I start. And I also thought about this subject because I didn't thought so much before about it. It felt like a natural. So if I'm going outside with school for education paths, of course, we are more focusing which is a forest which is close to the school, which is good reachable, where we can meet. But within the forest, and I'm automatically looking for structures. Biodiversity, not so much in many tree species, for example, but biodiversity or diversity in structures. And that I find very important. And people, like if we with grown-ups, if you more do these forest bathing activities or mindfulness activities, you need more open space. So like a beach forest with a big canopy, open space underneath is maybe more wanted, or gives you more security because you can see the surrounding. But on the other hand, some other people, they need more these protective spaces. So the combination of many things is very helpful. If we make a night walk with a school class and you go to a dense spruce forest, it's an amazing experience. But on the other hand, then you want to come out again and you have this open space. You feel like, oh yeah, now I'm through. Thank you. So these mixes of types, this is very interesting in my work. Yeah. So it's a biodiversity in structures and in different types of forest.
I should just say it's not something that I had considered before hearing about the project. I do think that people notice it, perhaps, but not using such terms as biodiversity. And I think that's the point. I think that while the research is ahead, that's not the case for the majority of the population. And I'm kind of interested in working with the general population rather than purely research, which is fine, I think, but I just think it was sort of, I do think you're right. I think that it's quite important. But like I said, I don't think the average person in the population notices. I just think that they hear this word and they read the news articles, but they don't think of it themselves when they go and stand in the forest. I think it's a good point.
I just want to add something. If you can talk about tree species and biodiversity and you can relate to tree species which are surrounding you, it's perfect.
It's interesting that both speakers have somehow stressed the importance of the Douglas fir. So there were several pictures from Douglas firs in the presentation of Bernd, and Amanda especially announced the importance of this tree species. What is, from a forestry perspective, of course, a good message that these things go very well together.
Well, every one of us is connected to forest. Maybe most of the people didn't find out about that yet, but thanks to people that do the work like you do, more and more people will find out within the Congress of 2017, we heard the speech of this Japanese professor that Katrine knows better than I. And he said why he's doing the work. And I got kind of, I don't know, scared maybe of the future, because I think, okay, this is the direction we're going. And in maybe 10 years, everybody needs someone to show him how to get more healthy, because we kind of forget about it, which is very, very sad. I'm happy for people to make a living of taking people by the hand and go into the forest. But for me, and I remembered my childhood with the pictures that Amanda showed us. It's clear. Well, if I have to think about it, just go into the forest. But for a forester, again, I don't go into the forest that I work in. I go into a forest somebody else is responsible for. So what's the point? I still hope that most of us don't need a forest bathing guide or a forest therapist, but I'm not sure if we can stop this process. And maybe in 10 years, we will all sit in telephone booths and look at animated forests to feel something that is so easy to feel by just going into the forest. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these presentations. They were really, really inspiring. And what you just said is that we probably, as research, we can probably provide some of the evidence that it actually has health effects of what Michael is sort of writing in the chat. We have to think about that it's not just species identity and diversity, but also other aspects of diversity, which we also recognize, obviously, in biodiversity research. And maybe, I think this was mentioned a few times, if we can work across sectors and actually the health sector to recognize this. So as we've seen, yeah, it probably needs some funding for this, but that's why I put the review in the UK. They have many more social prescribing projects now, where they actually put this as actual health measures from the GP, so the house arzt is prescribing this. And so I think we can learn from this. And I think in the US, they have this as well. And so I think it could also be gardening. It could be group walks in the park. So it's not only forest activities. But I guess that's a way forward. And this will, if this can map on several things, both nature connectedness, which we obviously also need for conservation, health and well-being, and then we also physical well-being with regards to climate change. And if we can have this triangle of biodiversity, climate change, and health, and address this, and maybe we have now an inroad also. I mean, that we are going to write a new, I think everyone is going to write new biodiversity strategies for their countries, at least in Europe, because we've got the new European biodiversity strategy. And that would be hopefully something where we could also provide some clear targets. If we can provide the evidence from different angles, I think this will be something which you can take from the last, not just the last 2 days, but from the joint expertise here in this room.
I was just wondering, did you make some forest baths in rather low biodiversity forests, just coincidentally, and then also in forests that you yourselves perceived as quite biodiverse and had or experienced a difference in between these forest bath experiences for yourself? Because I mean, this is something that, like, for me personally, especially when it comes to forest bathing and just immersing yourself with all of the senses, I think this is really what makes biodiversity also a bit more accessible to also lay people. I mean, like, you know, touching different barks and listening, especially zooming out and then hearing different birds. I mean, you don't need to be an expert for this, but then you all of it, like, naturally, or you just realize different aspects of your surrounding, more biodiversity. Actually, that's at least what I'm also hoping for. So that's why I would just wanted to know whether you have some experience on this, coincidentally.
Maybe I can tell you about an experience in this funeral forest. I think each tree has a different energy, and I feel connected. I also have my energy, and sometimes it connects, and sometimes I have an exchange, and that depends very much on tree species. So if I'm connected to an oak, which is my tree, the oak is so symbolic for me. Or if I'm more like a Douglas tree, like Uli Schrammel maybe is looking for. Or it was a joke, but I have a certain attraction to a certain tree. And if you have a biodiversity, you feel welcome, you feel invited, you feel a relation. I find that a very important aspect. Even if I'm doing like a mindfulness training where you look in the forest for your place, you find your place because of the energy, because of the surrounding, because what's fitting to you. The place finds you.
I haven't really thought about it in that particular way before, although of course you're right, I think. So it's more, I mean, especially, I don't know if I could try that locally in Freiburg using different kinds of places for the forest bathing. I tend to be a person who goes back to the same spots because I like them, right? So, and people like them too, so I tend to take them there. But it's a really good question. You probably design a research project around that, like literally taking people to the different spots and seeing that.
I have one more. Often it depends also on the sounds, because if you're close to Freiburg, you have not so many places which are quiet, which is much more important, so that you get not disturbed. Or you work with the disturbance, say like, okay, can I be mindful with this disturbance? It's also very interesting. But I wanted to, because we didn't talk about one important thing about biodiversity, about security. And if we provide a framework where people can go to, they don't need a guide. They just want to go into the forest. Maybe there is a path, or there is a special green school glass, or places you can go to. Many projects cannot take place because somebody has to take care for the security of the trees, and that are the foresters. So they are responsible if something is happening. So many projects are not to be taken because this is such a big subject. And if I'm really responsible for this funeral forest, it's permanently on my focus. I cannot really relax about that. So if we talk about also these healing forests, who takes care for the security? It's maybe not in the first focus, but that is such an important aspect. And the question is, if biodiverse forests are more secure than forests with less tree species, for example. I find that a very interesting aspect. So if you think about the ash trees, like if you have monocultures of ash trees, the whole forest is gone now in some areas close to Freiburg. And if there are only part of the forest, like in Freyam, where I'm responsible for, you can easily take them out, and it's not changing the canopy of the forest.
Today, what are your key lessons from these 2 days?
I'll say something very, very quickly. I'm still processing everything. I have like all these notes. So, but I just wanted to thank everybody. It's been really nice to meet everybody in this way, even though we can't meet in person. But hopefully, those of you who are local, maybe at some point we could. And to be in contact with all of you. This is a new network for me, totally new, maybe for many others as well. And to say that in terms of a takeaway, I think from today and a bit yesterday, just one thing I'll say, which is the concern for the what am I trying to say? Like sort of this issue of having foresters and forestry be more involved, and that's just and have it somehow be able to work with the forest bathing guides, but also with the mental health practitioners. To me, this is sort of there seems to be an issue of lack of integration on several levels here, and I would be very interested to see how this can be integrated in such a way so that people are speaking to each other and working on things rather than siloing off into their respective silos.
Take-home messages.
Yes, thank you. It was very inspiring for me as well to find out that some of our concerns that we are not alone with, that some of the questions we haven't found answers to, anybody else hasn't yet. So that's pleasing as well. And just to notice that there is in the discussion about health aspects of forests, that there's other people that think that foresters and experts on forest are needed there as well, is also very good to hear. So it was very interesting. As I said, if you want to see what we have done in practice, just feel free and ask. And maybe there's a second version of the workshop, maybe not virtual, but real. And I'd be happy to be invited again. Thank you.
When we started to prepare this workshop several months ago, and we had the first discussions with Therese, and we thought about the ideal guests for a national stakeholder workshop. We thought also about members of parliament, and we discussed which is the right ministry, and should we have somebody from the tourist office, and so on. And so we started quite formal. And in the end, we ended up with a very nice variety of guests within this workshop, and very attractive different perspectives on the same issue. And I think this was now somehow the recipe of the success of this group. I enjoyed the discussion very much. And I would like to say thank you to everybody who contributed, and to make sure that it really covered Germany from the far north to the south. And I think this was proved by our guests. So from the coast to Bavaria, more or less to the Alps, we have covered everything. And to make sure that we are really in connection, today I got this study here from so this is now the view, the very famous view from the picture. So Felix was just, yeah, so perfect.
Yeah, okay. So thanks a lot also from my side. It was a very interesting and inspiring 2 days workshop. I also, like Ulrich said, enjoyed the different perspectives and views very much. And I think we learned from each other quite a lot. At least I can say for me, I learned a lot from the different perspectives. From different practices that are already ongoing currently, different initiatives, and then always linking those to our general question of the biodiversity of forest ecosystems. And I would be happy if we could somehow stay in touch, and as Katrina said, we would be very happy to stay in touch with you, to stay in contact, and please do so. We would, of course, also be happy if in the next years from now, when our PhD students will finish their work and will publish their work, that we can distribute our results within this group or to other people involved in that field, of course. And we would be happy if some of our results could then also find their way into implementation and into practice. So I think there's not much more to say. As Ulrich said at the first day, this field of forest and health is still quite harmonic field with not so many conflicts as in other issues related to forest. But we also saw that there, in some cases, there's a need to, clarify concepts, and especially the need for more interactions among different sectors, the need for information about different initiatives, about facts related to forests and health. So I think there's a lot to do. There's an interesting way ahead of us. There are many similar initiatives, of course, going on somewhere else. And so I think we'll have an interesting future ahead of us around that topic of forest biodiversity and health. So thanks again, especially thanks again to the team of the FVA. Therese, you did a great job in organizing everything. A big thank you to Katrina for the very nice moderation and organization of this workshop. Both of you, you did a really great job. Also thanks to our team here, team members here in the University of Freiburg, Sandra and Taylor, who also helped in the preparation. And thanks to everybody for your very interesting talks, presentations, your discussion points, and stay healthy. Let's go to the forest.